Hiding deep within the lush woodlands of the US and Canada, a mythical cryptid said to have an unquenchable thirst for blood. Stories passed on for centuries from the original homeowners of the land. Let's explore this mystery and possibly piece together some theories as to what it may be. Hello everyone, my name is Vander and welcome to Vander Explains. In today's episode of Cryptid Chronicles, we will take a look at the case of the native North American legend, the Wendigo. So let's get started. The Wendigo or Wendigo has been long related to the tales and stories shared by the First Nations people. Speakers of the Algonquin family language such as the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Abenaki, the Algonquin, the Innu, and many more share the same stories and accounts of the Wendigo. These people lived across both Canada and the United States of America, mainly along the eastern coasts in what is now known as Quebec, New Brunswick, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, just to name a few. The word Wendigo roughly translates to evil spirit, or in other cases, man-eater. Depictions of the Wendigo can slightly differ from culture to culture, but they can all agree that it is a cannibalistic and malevolent creature that lives in the forests and is most active during the winter. The Wendigo is described by the Algonquin people as, quote, a giant with a heart of ice. Sometimes it is thought to be entirely made of ice. Its body is skeletal and deformed, with missing lips and toes, unquote. On the other hand, the Ojibwe said that it was, quote, a large creature as tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprint full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory. And those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh, unquote. According to legends, a Wendigo is created when a person resorts to eating human flesh in order to survive. The act of cannibalizing a fellow human is thought to have cursed them and thus turned them into a Wendigo. Other accounts also mention that a Wendigo is a spirit born of evil that can possess a human and alter their body into that of a beast. The spirit will look for people that display its favorite character traits, which are greed and gluttony. The Wendigo is also described to have an exceptional sense of smell, have incredible eyesight, as well as having an extremely foul stench exuding off of its body. Although early accounts of Wendigos were passed on through stories and folktale, it is still quite intriguing how many different tribes and cultures across the North Americas have eerily identical stories. One of the earliest non-indigenous records of the Wendigo was that made by a French writer and Jesuit missionary named Paul Lejeune in the 17th century when he decided to live amongst the Algonquin people. Paul was an advocate for the settling of nomadic tribes into agricultural reserves, and he accompanied the Algonquin people from 1634 to 1635 on their winter hunts. This was when Paul learned about the legend of the Wendigo. He was so captivated by the stories that he decided to write an excerpt about the creature in his formal reports. This report was sent back to his superiors in Paris in the year 1636. In his excerpts, he wrote, quote, the Wendigo had eaten some Atikamegokin. He would eat a great many more of them if he were not called elsewhere, but that creature would come in his place to devour them, even up to the French fort, that he would slaughter the French themselves, unquote. Some stories of the Wendigo can also be heard in the western frontiers in the 1800s. The Plains indigenous people, like the Cree, as well as tradesmen working for the Hudson Bay Company, has had their fair share of reports and encounters. One particularly interesting report was that made by an HBC tradesman who described an encounter with a Cree spiritual leader named Abis Habis, claiming to have descended into fits of religious passion. Abis Habis was reported to have been greedy and killed an entire indigenous family. Their own Cree community members had to take drastic measures and had Abis Habis killed, because he was suspected of turning into a Wendigo. The stories of the Wendigo carried on for centuries, and missionaries who came and left Canada continued to report encounters well into the 20th century. In popular culture, the Wendigo we probably know is one that is depicted with the head of a deer or deer skeleton, has huge antlers and ribs protruding out of its body. This was not the case of the tales passed down for centuries by the First Nations people. This altered portrayal of the Wendigo was first seen in books written by authors like Algernon Blackwood in 1910 and August Derleth in 1930s and 40s. Over the next few decades and with the birth of media, the depiction of the Wendigo was further modified. In 1973, the Wendigo made its debut into the pages of Marvel Comics as a villain in The Incredible Hulk, Volume 162. In 1989, famous horror author Stephen King made the Wendigo one of the primary antagonists in his renowned book, Pet Sematary. The world seemed to have a growing fascination over the Wendigo, and it made appearances in many movies and TV series. Movies like The Wendigo in 2001, Dark Was the Night in 2014, and Antlers in 2021 all had their versions of the Wendigo. In television, series like Supernatural, Teen Wolf, and Grimm also included this creature into their stories. The Wendigo even went as far as appearing in video games like Until Dawn in 2015 and Fallout 76 in 2018. Even though the tale of the Wendigo has been canonically viewed by many as that of a fictional beast, throughout the 21st century, people hiking or living close to the woodlands near eastern Canada and the US still have their fair share of stories and encounters. The story you're about to listen to is that of a Wendigo encounter by Reddit user Bacon Beatdown. For the purposes of this story, let's call this user Ben. It was late fall of 2010 in northern Canada. Ben, his father, and his elder brother went out deep into the wilderness to hunt for moose. They left early in the morning just before sunrise to try and cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. They trekked through winding rivers and had to repeatedly carry their rafts over rapids. Ben's father decided that it was better to continue the rest of the journey the following morning. So they decided to camp down, being about halfway to their destination. When everyone had bedded down for the night, Ben decided to grab some firewood and also relieve himself down by the riverbank, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out of the tree line about 15 yards away, Ben said, quote, "I could hear rustling from the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy, or lightheaded. And I could smell this putrid stink like old milk or rotten food." Unquote. Ben then saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly, and began to take the shape of a head with slight facial features. Ben's eye began to adjust to the darkness, and along the tree line he heard a voice. Ben oddly recognized the voice, and he said it sounded like, quote, "one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative," unquote. The creature said to Ben, "Hello, I've missed you. Come see me." Ben then smiled and stepped forward a little, but then stopped to analyze the situation. The creature stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. As chunks of flesh from the creature's cheek began to fall away, Ben said, quote, "I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it all, so I started to back away and make my way back to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice and I was further away from the firelight." Unquote. The creature then became angry and shouted at Ben, so he turned and ran away, but as he looked back one last time, he saw the most disgusting thing he ever witnessed. He said, quote, "It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes and hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin." Unquote. Ben ran as fast as he could while trying to yell for help, but fear had consumed his voice. He ran along the riverbank and could hear the heavy breaths and stomping feet from the creature right behind him. He made it to the top of the riverbank when suddenly it grabbed Ben's legs as he jumped. Ben struggled, gripped and tore through the grass, hanging on to dear life as he managed to yell, quote, "Someone has my leg!" Unquote. His brother then ran over to where Ben was and pulled him back up to the riverbank. Ben was terrified, trying to explain what he saw. He was trying to convince his brother that he was not seeing things or that he didn't go crazy. His brother just nodded and said, quote, "I saw it too. I know," unquote. A chill ran along Ben's spine as it solidified what he just went through, that someone else acknowledged what he had saw. The brothers stayed up all night, rifles loaded and close by. They all packed up when the sun came by and decided to go back home instead. Ben and his family had not shared the story to anyone else out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. He has had haunting nightmares and was not able to sleep for months after that incident. He would see things in the dark out of the corner of his eye every now and then. He went to shamans for help and learned that it was most likely a Wendigo. And if someone encountered one and survived, it will latch onto you like a parasite. It supposedly can only do so if it touched the person, which it did to Ben. Ever since then, Ben has been on edge every time he gets close to the woods. He realized that it would never be the same again after this encounter with the Wendigo. His post has gotten several positive and supportive feedbacks since its publication. And although people do seem to respond with genuine curiosity or even skepticism, there is no doubt in Ben's mind that he did go through a horrific encounter with something or someone. After listening to Bacon Beatdown's encounter and also learning about the history and origins of the Wendigo, it is now time to theorize what the Wendigo really is. Our first theory is that the Wendigo is in fact an undiscovered species of animal that lives deep within the woodlands of North America. There is evidence to suggest that a mysterious creature or creatures occupy a rarely traversed part of the forest. Some people doing camps or hikes around the area would attest to the fact that they have been hearing strange noises or noticing unusual formations of broken trees. The clip you're about to hear is that of an incident in 2019 where hunter Gino Mikis and his family heard strange blood-curdling howls and shrieks coming from somewhere within the Canadian wilderness. This clip has been audio enhanced for all of you to listen to. The clip has gone viral since its upload, and many have speculated to try and debunk the sounds, but others are convinced that it was made by an unknown creature. Scientists have argued that it sounds like a large wolf or a pack of wolves howling in synchronicity, or perhaps it is that of a large bear and that the howls just sound a lot louder due to the echo provided by the trees. Local hunter and trekkers, however, are not so sure. Spending most of their life in the wilderness, these hunters are well accustomed to the sounds that the local animals make, and the sound in this video was definitely one they have not heard before. So could the Wendigo be an actual undiscovered creature living deep within the woods? Or perhaps there is a much simpler explanation for these sounds and encounters. Our second theory is that the Wendigo is merely a cautionary tale made by the First Nations people that was passed on from generation to generation. Being around for centuries, the First Nations people have lived through some of the harshest conditions that any human beings could possibly endure. During times of famine, especially in the winter, the story of the Wendigo is rumored to have been spread around this time. Amongst the locals, there have been recorded instances of cannibalism committed by their own community members. They were unable to contain their morality and lost their minds due to hunger. So when food was scarce and the blizzard continued to pour, these individuals resorted to eating the flesh of their own people. At first, reports only showed that they would resort to this in desperation, and only ate those who had recently passed. But when bloodlust took over, some began to kill the living and consume their flesh afterwards. The story of the Wendigo is thus born. Said to have been an evil spirit or creature, the story is told to discourage or even scare off the people from ever resorting to cannibalism. Although the story might be used as a precaution or warning, it is still interesting to note that it was based on true events when a person's hunger consumes their mind. So in order for them to survive and ensure their longevity as a community, the story of the Wendigo is born. So could the Wendigo really just be a tale to scare people from committing cannibalism, or is there in fact a darker truth to the Wendigo? Our third theory is that the Wendigo is in fact not a creature or spirit at all, but actually a mental illness or disorder. Known as the Wendigo complex or Wendigo psychosis, it is described as, quote, a psychiatric culture-bound disorder manifesting mainly by cannibalistic acts and fear associated with their commitment, unquote. Though it is not officially recognized by science as a real disorder or condition, there are some scholarly research articles regarding this unusual occurrence. Articles written by Robert A. Brightman in 1988, as well as a more recent article by Michalina Kolen and her colleagues in 2019, talk about this condition in depth. One famous case that was used as a foundation for the articles is that of an event in the winter of 1878. A Cree man named Swiftrunner, who was a trapper, fell ill due to permanent hunger. When food was hard to come by, he finally snapped and decided to murder and cannibalize a mother and her 5 children. He was diagnosed with Wendigo psychosis and was executed in Fort Saskatchewan. The symptoms of the Wendigo complex is described to be instigated by hunger, depression, and loneliness during the winter. In the beginning, a patient will often suffer from anorexia and malnutrition. This then escalates to hallucinations and psychosis, which can be caused by a vitamin and nutrition deficiency. The patient will continuously lose weight and their bodies will start to feed off of their own muscles and fat. From there, neurosis will happen and they will disassociate themselves with their surroundings. On their last and final straw, they could either succumb to death or instead divert to cannibalism. This theory could play hand in hand with our second theory. So could the Wendigo actually be a mental disorder or illness caused by extreme famine, or is there actually more to this illness than meets the eye? Our fourth and final theory is that the Wendigo is a genetic medical anomaly that affects a person's appetite and hunger. There was an account of a French man known as Terrare, who has an extremely rare disorder that affected his metabolism. Terrare was born in Lyon, France around 1772, and he displayed his abnormally voracious appetite from birth. During his teenage years, he would need to consume his own body weight in food every day, which led him to be cast out by his own family. He then started to beg and force himself to survive before joining a traveling circus. In those times, he showed his capability of eating stones, baskets of fruit, and even live animals. When the war broke loose at 1792, Terrare was enlisted in the military. He was unable to keep up and often fell in exhaustion and hunger. The army even gave him rations made for 15 people and allowed him to consume any live animals he found just to keep him satisfied. The military then realized his potential as a tool for smuggling documents, but during his first mission, he was captured and tortured by the Prussians before being dumped back to the French. Before being discharged by the army, he begged the military surgeon to cure his ailment, but to no avail. Terrare then instead wound up homeless and scavenging for any food he can find. There were reports of him eating farmers' livestock and even small children. Terrare finally passed at the age of around 26 due to tuberculosis. Although this theory is quite a stretch to what a Wendigo is traditionally known for, could it be that the Wendigo was actually a person with an extremely rare genetic disorder? In the end, we could only speculate to what the Wendigo really is. Maybe in the years ahead, we can finally put this case to rest and definitively identify what this cryptid really is. I hope that you find this story as interesting as I did when I started to research for it. It is definitely a strange and exciting case to discuss. Now, if you have enjoyed this video and made it this far, please leave a like and possibly consider subscribing to the channel. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this case, and maybe recommend me other topics and cases to explain. For now, this is Vander, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next one.